how can one person's 13-minute visit to one place spark a worldwide controversy? It's a question I've been thinking about after Itamar Ben-Gvir, Israel's recently appointed national security minister, visited the Temple Mount, also known as the Al-Aqsa compound, last week. His visit drew international condemnation from the Arab world and Palestinian leadership, and the UN Security Council convening a, quote, emergency session to discuss it. So why this intense reaction to one person's visit to this holy site? Was this level of response really necessary? And should Ben-Gvir have been allowed to visit the Temple Mount at all? The answer to that question will depend on how you view pragmatism versus idealism and how important being right is to you. And I'm going to give you 3 thoughts for how to think about this, and one of them is going to include a scene from The Matrix. But before that, let's ask the big question: what is the Temple Mount? Here's what it is. The Temple Mount, which Muslims call Haram al-Sharif, is a 35-acre compound in the old city of Jerusalem containing a few important structures: the Dome of the Rock, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and around it the Western Wall, which in Hebrew is called the Kotel. For Jews, the Temple Mount is the holiest place, period. It's also the 3rd holiest shrine for Muslims, after Mecca and Medina. And by the way, the contest of who it's holier for is so tired. Here's the point. It's really important to both the Jewish people and the Muslims. Here's what's really important to understand for this story. In what's known as the status quo at the Temple Mount, Jews are not allowed to pray there, but they are allowed to visit there. And the status quo agreement has been very controversial to many Israelis and Jewish people across the world ever since. The status quo agreement starts to get to why Ben-Gvir wanted to visit. In a video published by Reuters during his visit, Ben-Gvir explained it this way.
The Temple Mount is the most important place for the people of Israel. The Temple Mount is open for everybody: Muslims, Christians, and yes, also Jews. Also Jews. In the government which I'm a member of, there won't be racist discrimination, and Jews will visit the Temple Mount.
So there you have it, directly from Ben-Gvir. But when the news broke that Ben-Gvir wanted to visit the site, Hamas threatened to respond with violence, and Ben-Gvir said he would not cave in to their threats, tweeting, "The Israeli government, of which I am a member, will not surrender to a vile, murdering organization. The Temple Mount is open to everyone, and if Hamas thinks that if it threatens me, it will deter me, let them understand that times have changed." There's so much noise about this visit, and most of us get our news either from the BBC or Fox or MSNBC or wherever. But let's hear it from all different places. The Jordanian government said in a statement that it condemns in the severest of terms Ben-Gvir's storming of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, while the Palestinian Foreign Ministry called it a, quote, unprecedented provocation. A spokesman for the White House National Security Council said that the U.S. stands firmly for the preservation of the status quo with respect to the holy sites in Jerusalem. On the other side, a senior official in Prime Minister Netanyahu's office told reporters that Netanyahu is committed to strictly preserving the status quo at the Temple Mount. He also called the claims that Ben-Gvir's visit violated the status quo baseless. But not everyone saw it that way, even among members of Netanyahu's government. Take United Torah Judaism member of Knesset Moshe Gafni, for example. He condemned Ben-Gvir's visit as an unnecessary and dangerous provocation, and he added this caused only damage with no benefit whatsoever. Haaretz columnist Tzvi Bar-El agreed and took it a few steps further, writing, Ben-Gvir is determined to provoke an intifada that will be named for him. Jeez. The British columnist Melanie Phillips said no, and she strongly pushed back to this, emphasizing that Ben-Gvir visited for less than 15 minutes and did it without fanfare or media attention and didn't pray there or say anything to stir up trouble. Ben-Gvir was fully entitled to be there. He did nothing out of the ordinary. Other Israeli Jews, including government ministers, regularly visit the site. So what's the answer? Should Ben-Gvir have been allowed to visit? And should he continue to visit the Temple Mount or not? I'm not going to tell you what to think, but here's how I think about it. The doomsday scenario is that when a very public and provocative figure like Itamar Ben-Gvir visits the Temple Mount in the first week of becoming a minister, well, there is a possibility that it will indeed provoke the region, which is kind of a powder keg at times. Hamas likes opportunities to engage in violence. We've seen this sort of thing happen before. On the other hand, if the demonstration of authority and ownership and genuine connection is so important because it symbolizes the Jewish return to their holiest of places, maybe you think that's worth the provocation. Wherever you fall on that, let's rise above the noise with these 3 thoughts. Number 1, provocation is provocation. Let's be aware of the consequences. There's a context for all of this. There's a history of how controversial visits to the Temple Mount have led to violence. In September 2000, then Prime Minister Ariel Sharon visited the Temple Mount.
It's a normal thing to visit the Temple Mount, and every Jew can visit the Temple Mount exactly as every Arab can visit any other place in the country.
Some argue that this act either sparked or contributed to or was the straw that broke the camel's back, which led to the Second Intifada. You gotta check out our video on the Second Intifada on the Unpacked channel. Others disagree, by the way, and argue that Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat used Sharon's visit as an excuse to wage the Intifada and that it would have happened anyway. Regardless, the point is that our actions matter. Even small actions have consequences. Number 2. Too often, the question of whether Ben-Gvir should be allowed to visit the Temple Mount gets conflated with the question of whether Jews should be allowed to visit there, or whether Jews have any connection there at all. I was reading an article on this story from Al Jazeera, and all I saw was a history of how Muslims are connected to this area. And they are! But the Jewish people also have an ancient connection to the Temple Mount, and Jews should absolutely be allowed to visit. How can it not make you sad that Jewish people can't pray at their holiest site? Let's separate the question of Ben-Gvir from the question of the Jewish people and their connection to the Temple Mount. And number 3, I mentioned this earlier. Remember that famous scene in The Matrix when Neo is offered 2 options?
All I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
He can live his life with the red pill or the blue pill. The red pill will make sure you see truth and reasoning. It can upset or unsettle you potentially, but hey, at least you get the truth. When you take the blue pill, you get to live in an ordinary reality, not bothered by the facts of life. When it comes to this conflict, a question we can ask ourselves is, what pill do we want to swallow? And what are the implications of each? We can choose to ignore the complications and see only our side of the story, and we can live happily ever after. Or we can understand the truths and the very real reality. In this case, yes, it was clearly provocative for Ben-Gvir to go to the Temple Mount when he did. And yes, the Jewish people have an impenetrable and historic connection to this area. For me, I choose the red pill. What will you choose? As always, make sure to subscribe to Today Unpacked with me, Noam Weissman. Make sure to click that bell, make sure to subscribe, make sure to like, make sure to share, make sure to engage. I want to hear from you. What do you think about all this? Looking forward to discussing in a normal and healthy way.